everybody, and welcome to the Southern Stinger, where this is a podcast where we plan to explore and analyze features of Southern hospitality and its extended role in connecting the South as a whole. I'm Gabriel Ceniza, and I'm with three other co-hosts.
Gabby Grey,
Katrina Potak,
and Amy Doukoure.
Today, we'd like to assess what Southern hospitality is, whether it exists today, and how hospitality has been redefined throughout the history of the Southeast.
To get us started, I wanted to look into what the word hospitality actually means. Going off of an essay, Hospitality and Generosity, by Matthew Hurd, he states that hospitality suggests not only a relationship between the wealthy and destitute, but also a spiritual obligation on the part of the wealthy to attend to this relationship. He also cites Society Today in 2003 and continues to teach that today, Southern colonies. And the word Southern hospitality, the term Southern hospitality, wasn't really popular until the 1820s and 1830s. It's very interesting because the concept of hospitality existed before, and it existed back in the 1300s, as we mentioned earlier. The question is Southern hospitality really just defined in the southern region of the United States, or is it something that was just taken as a marketing tactic for Southerners to use to push certain agendas? So I'd also like to mention that the concept of Southern hospitality also existed in the northern part of the United States, and the English professor at UMass talks about how Northerners actually found a more biblical basis for hospitality, which I think that our generation typically associates with the South, because they saw it as a way to welcome in strangers, and particularly in the 19th century, that included runaway slaves. So I'd like to open up the discussion based off of this kind of origin of hospitality, and just ask whether you guys had any experiences, personal experiences, or found anything in the literature about hospitality, and if you think that the definition from the 1300s continues today and continued through the 18th and 19th centuries of the United States.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here today and talk about this. So, let me introduce myself a little bit. I'm Gabby Grey, a third-year economics major at Georgia Tech. It's interesting because I'm originally from New York, lived there for 18 years of my life. So when I quote-unquote moved down to the South, it was like I was migrating to a different world. It's funny, I tell this story all the time, but literally when my family and I arrived at the Atlanta airport, we took an Uber to arrive to our next destination in Georgia. I kid you not, people were waving to us outside the car, and I asked my family if they were about to jump us. It's funny now because it's like it represents the stark difference of culture from the Northeast compared to the South. People in New York are stereotypically seen as mean, aggressive, and rushed, and to have a person wave to the car was like a completely different experience in culture, because it's like no one would wave at you in New York because they're trying to get to the next destination. So I actually did a scholarly article from Betsy Gardner from Ole Miss, and she discussed Southern hospitality and the politics of kind of belonging. In her journal, she stated that the origins of Southern hospitality can be found among the now antiquated social practices of the antebellum planter class, whom visited homes of aunts, uncles, and just family as primary kind of extended kin. And so kind of what my co-host was saying about the origins of Southern hospitality, we can kind of base it off of like plantation society and how that was kind of correlating and kind of altered by the Civil War and Reconstruction and other socio-political things like the Jim Crow era and the Civil Rights Movement, and how that kind of transformed Southern hospitality and just the South in general. So discourse regarding this, and particularly regarding the slave labor, kind of made hospitality possible. Because while forgetting that historical origins of Southern hospitality lies in the economy of slave labor, we also gesture towards romanticizing certain events, such as the discourse of Southern hospitality, and how that kind of conjures images of the antebellum South, which was viewed at the time as violent and racist. And to this day, we kind of can refer appearances or instances in the South as violent and racist as well. So I would kind of like to ask my other co-hosts why they view Southern hospitality as a thing and what their opinions on it. is.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who grew up in the South, I kind of associate Southern hospitality with, the stereotypical kind of biblical Good Samaritan person just trying to be helpful with their neighbor. I definitely would have never expected it to be like a defense of the social lifestyle amongst slave owners in the South. Like, if I were to imagine Southern hospitality back then, I'd imagine like the people in the Underground Railroad harboring fugitive slaves, helping them out. But it's definitely interesting, and I guess the research doesn't lie. But I think it's definitely transformed today into something that's adopted across a broad South, not just Georgia, not just the deep South. I think almost anywhere, even up north, there's kind of a stereotype, like I guess in Boston, where people might be rude, but there's still good people out there, I guess. What do you think, Ami?
Yeah, so I remember speaking to my friend one time, and he's from New York, and he was telling me a story of how like people down here in the South, like they move slow and they talk slow compared to people in New York, and I didn't really understand what he meant because like I was raised in the South, so like I'm kind of used to this. Like I only went to New York once, and when I did go to New York, like people were moving fast, like they were kind of rude in my opinion, and like it wasn't giving Southern hospitality. And he also mentioned how like one morning he was just walking around the city and then people were waving at him and saying good morning, and this was so weird to him because in New York like people would not say good morning to him. And I found that funny because like even when I'm here walking around I would like say good morning to like random people even if I don't know you. And yeah, and like he just never received this kind of hospitality when he was in New York. And from the article, the Delta Airlines, airline workers were held to a high pedestal of delivering the company's brand of you never get a second chance to make a good impression and being the nice guys. And this marketing tool expanded Delta to become one of the biggest airline companies in the world, focusing on home, family, and womanhood.
Going off of the Delta article from Smiles to Miles, I wanted to point out one of the lines that says that the Delta spirit, the airline's brand of Southern hospitality, became an effective marketing tool throughout the airline's post-war expansion and the foundation for Delta's workplace culture. So I think that we all talked about how we've experienced Southern hospitality even today, that it has existed from the 1600s up until the present day, but that it's taken different forms, and what someone might coin as Southern hospitality isn't actually authentic. And so I wanted to ask you guys, based off of that, do you guys feel that Southern hospitality has been used as kind of a marketing tool and doesn't really display like true hospitality?
That's a very interesting question. I think it has kind of been used or manipulated to be some sort of marketing tool, especially because the demographic of people moving down to the South has risen over the last couple of years. And so I think you can kind of attribute agenda for people to move to the South just because, there's, I guess, the financial bearings are probably better in the South. And I think the Northeast is kind of viewed as something that can be more financially arduous in the North because along with the culture of moving and kind of old money and new money in the South, there seems to be more opportunity in the South. So I think for sure it can definitely, the idea of Southern hospitality can be manipulated, but also there is that intrinsic detail of people just being nice in the South. I think that kind of goes back to the culture of like things being rushed, like one of our co-hosts said before, things being rushed and people trying to get somewhere and just like getting a coffee and a bagel in the morning, but it's like they're doing that just to get on the train because they have to rush in those next 15 minutes or else they're gonna miss their time in to get into their job. Like it's just this idea of being rushed and like kind of taking like that easy kind of lackadaisical labor to try to get to your work in the South sometimes. And I think that can be kind of discombobulating when people think about it. But so what I'm saying really is like, yes, it can be manipulated, but also there is also this authenticity and people just actually being nicer in the South because I think they're able to take more time. And also like there's this quote and it's like myths, there's often truths and myths. And I think you can kind of say, or whatever you take off of that quote, it's like sometimes when people say things, we take it from face point value, but like, so it could completely be a myth or it can be a lie, but you can also find some truth into that. So yes, things can be skewed and manipulated, but also we can find some authenticity in that statement.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think it's what you make of it in terms of perspective. I think a good example of it being marketed would be Coke as a Southern company and how all their ads are centered around happiness and good experiences. But then I also think if you were to drive 2 hours south of Atlanta and just hang out at a local grocery store, you're bound to find an old lady who would come up to you and be really friendly and really nice.
I agree. Like in the South, like generally there is Southern hospitality, but like some companies could manipulate it as a marketing tool to get more revenue.
Going off of that point, I'd like to circle back to the English professor who wrote a book titled The Southern Hospitality Myth: Ethics, Politics, Race, and American Memory. He also talks about how in his class he reviews pop culture with his students, and they talked about the use of Southern plantations in present day and how there's a huge market for plantation weddings, and that there are photographs all over the internet of bridesmaids and brides in white gowns hanging out of old slave cabin windows. This was really eye-opening to his class and really brought up a discussion about the ways in which we're viewing the Southern past and how that influences like our concept of the South and hospitality. So does that like bother any of you guys, or you think it's just a building that they're using? I mean, is that like taking away from the history, I guess, that's in the South?
Well, I think there's always kind of stemming factors in what I would consider Southern hospitality. It in itself is just a word, but I do think there's historical background to what that means. So like in reference to this situation, there's definitely national debate regarding Southern hospitality and how it kind of correlates with a political system or just like a sense of solidarity in the South, belonging among white Americans in all parts of the country, while relegating African Americans and just slavery as something else. So I'm not exactly mad at it, but I am aware that there are historic factors that attribute to certain things that are meaningful to, let's say, my culture or my race, things that are happening that can, to this day and age can, may still intrinsically affect my life. So I think it's an interesting thing. I'm not mad, but, I am yearning to learn more about it and yearning to like see it for what it is and the truth, and just being overall, having overall awareness of it. Thanks for tuning into our podcast, guys, The Southern Singer. In this first episode, we deep dived into the truth and origins of Southern hospitality with a combination of peer review and personal opinions. We had students/experts today. My name is Gabriel Grey.
My name is Katrina Potak.
My name is Amy Doukoure.
This is Gabriel Ceniza. Thank you for tuning in.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening.